The first thing you do after being reborn as a planet is to draw asteroids to crash into yourself, because you find you are actually a dead planet. There is no life on you. No oceans, not even an atmosphere. All you have are countless craters of all sizes. Your body is captured by a huge gas giant. After being tidally locked, you orbit your parent planet day and night. Far away, there is a fiercely burning red star. This also makes you realize this is not the solar system at all. After observing yourself, you are just like an ordinary rocky planet with a core and geological layer structure. But the surface rock layer blocks all volcanic activities. The geological activity is far too calm, which makes it impossible for you to nurture life at all. To create life, you recall the knowledge from Earth in your past life. Some scientists once speculated that life on Earth might have originated from the impact of ice-bearing asteroids. So you activate your perception and try your best to detect surrounding celestial bodies. Finally, after orbiting the parent planet dozens of times, you spot 2 asteroids. Their volume is about 1% of yours. But as soon as you get close, you find you can never compete with the parent planet. The 2 asteroids are captured by the gas giant long before they get near you. They soon enter the Roche limit of the parent planet and crash into its surface, followed by a violent explosion. You look at the explosion range that is larger than your diameter, and your heart races with fear. The disappointment you felt just now turns into relief in a blink. You also realize, even if more asteroids pass by, they will definitely be captured by the huge gravity of that gas giant. You will never get your turn. But not long after, several meteors drawn by the gas giant's gravity suddenly hit your surface easily. The impact kicks up boulders that can block out the sky, and dust, which successfully leave several huge circular craters on your surface. You check the newly left scars and find you are actually quite lucky. Those meteors are exactly the ice-bearing kind mentioned in the theory. You watch excitedly as the star's heat gradually melts those solid ice blocks. You feel like your core is about to throb. New life might be born on your planet soon, but the water keeps evaporating under the star's light, decreasing gradually, and finally dispersing into the void of the universe. The spark of life is gone just like that. You think hard about what went wrong. Oh, right, the atmosphere. It's the atmosphere. Without it, water definitely can't stay. You carefully recall what your high school teacher taught. In the early days of Earth's formation, crustal movement was extremely active. A large number of volcanoes erupted, and those released gases formed the early atmosphere. That's right, isn't it? But you are a cold, rocky planet now. Your crust has long been stable. You orbit the parent planet several more times, frustrated. If only you could control your own body. As soon as this thought crosses your mind, you suddenly feel violent tremors on your sphere, then cracks appear in several places. A huge amount of magma erupts violently from there. Bosun is stunned. What's going on here? I just said erupt, and it actually erupted. The violently erupting volcanoes don't seem to be stopping anytime soon. A large amount of dust and gas is lifted high into the sky. No way, is this a coincidence? Then if I say all of you erupt, could the whole planet erupt? Just then, even stronger tremors start. Your sphere is ruptured, with countless cracks. More and more violent eruptions begin too. The large amounts of gas erupted by the volcanoes, white, gray, or black, gradually gather together, merging into small patches and then large swathes. Finally, all the gas across the planet gathers together, and as the volcanic eruptions continue, it keeps getting thicker. Bosun, holy crap. This is actually happening? Bosun tries to stop. One erupting crater, and it actually stops. He finds that he seems to be a planet, with a magical power to control everything. He has no idea why he has this power. After all, reincarnating as a planet is weird enough already. Having special powers is something that doesn't shock Bosun that much. What he cares about now is what's happening right now, which is he's about to enter the era where he has a primitive atmosphere. Thousands of volcanoes across the planet are still erupting violently, with no sign of stopping, spitting out violent magma. All this greatly increases the surface area of Bosun's sphere, making him a bit bigger than before. The clouds formed by the large amounts of erupted gas start getting thicker and thicker, rising higher and higher, finally floating high in the sky, turning darker from grayish white. But Bosun thinks this is far from enough. How thick is Earth's atmosphere? This is barely anything. Keep erupting. My volcanoes? Bosun is pumped. He hopes he can get an atmosphere quickly. That's the only way to lay the foundation for life. More volcanic craters emerge from the surface. Magma keeps erupting like it's free. Bosun can't feel any pain. He just thinks he looks like a ripe lychee. Lots of bumps and super red. He orbits the parent planet again and again, and the volcanoes keep erupting. Bosun is enjoying this process. During this period, the violent phenomena on his surface don't stop. Those dark clouds collide and rub against each other, even sending countless terrifying bolts of lightning, flashing across the surface. That's probably enough, right? After a long time passes, Bosun sees that the clouds have overcome the gravity and are even starting to spill into outer space. He thinks it's probably enough. He can also see the accumulated clouds are now terrifyingly dark. What's next again? Let's think, just as he starts. To reduce volcanic activity, the dark clouds covering the fiery red surface, accompanied by non-stop violent thunder, start pouring down heavy rain. Bosun has never seen such heavy rain. Each drop looks like it could drill through the ground. The rain seems like it will never stop. After Bosun orbits the parent planet more than 100 times, it's still going. But he doesn't want the rain to stop either. Bosun observes carefully. The endless rain cools the crimson magma erupted from the surface, producing thick white steam. This steam rises back to the sky and becomes new rain clouds. As time passes, the temperature of the magma gets lower and lower, gradually forming a hard black outer layer. At the same time, as if joining in the fun, a group of meteors suddenly come from outer space. They turn into a meteor shower and start bombarding the surface again. These impacts create more huge sunken craters on Bosun's surface. Some are even thousands of meters deep. After the endless rain falls on the surface, it gradually converges into streams. Then the streams merge into wider rivers. The rushing rivers flow into those huge craters, while also eroding the hard surface crust. The originally hard crust is slowly eroded, forming deep canyons. The flood made of rainwater also makes these canyons wider and wider. The huge craters are slowly filled up and finally burst their banks uncontrollably. More water flows into even deeper areas. Bosun observes for a long time and finally figures it out. This is how the oceans formed. A really long time passed just like that. The torrential rain above kept falling for who knows how many years. Bosun watched the color of the clouds. It gradually faded to light gray too. He glanced at those giant craters. Some of them still weren't filled up. He decided to restart volcanic activity. All the current amount of water can't create anything for him. Like a vast deep ocean, Bosun also started taking more actions at the same time. He tore at the impact craters to make them wider and deeper. Then he raised part of the Earth's surface further. This split the surface into two extremes. Half were deep pits constantly filling with rainwater. The other half was relatively high upland terrain. These are the oceans and the continents. Bosun looked around. He felt this wasn't finished yet. He decided to copy how Earth is structured. He tore apart the entire surface to create several tectonic plates. Then he used the movement of the plates to form abysses thousands of meters deep. And endless mountain peaks increased movement at plate boundaries, made the peaks grow rapidly. Several plateaus also formed across the globe. The abysses on the seafloor became bottomless ocean trenches. The entire previously elevated landmass was now torn into several pieces by the plates. The distribution of land and sea was mostly complete. Bosun took control of the volcanoes on land and under the sea, making them erupt violently again. This made the rainfall even more severe. It also gradually filled up those deep pits, forming several boundless oceans. Volcanic craters in the ocean formed countless small islands. Another who knows how many years passed. The rain clouds gradually dispersed and finally faded away completely. The original black of the rain clouds gradually turned light gray, then became semi-transparent. The thick layer of air that formed was Bosun's primitive atmosphere. Bosun looked at the land, oceans, and atmosphere with satisfaction. He could feel a huge sense of accomplishment. All of these were created by his power. In a very short period of time, he even noticed that during this process, the temperature on the sphere's surface was slowly dropping. It went from nearly 1,000 degrees before, after the oceans formed, gradually dropping below 100 degrees. The foundation was all set. All that was left was to start preparing to create life. Why do I suddenly feel like a creator? Mwahahaha. Bosun was a little pleased with himself, but he didn't stop completely yet. Volcanic activity still had thousands of active craters across the globe. The atmosphere wasn't fully formed yet. He felt he first had to establish this cycle. He would let the volcanoes gradually calm down when the time was right. Time passed gradually. The temperature of the entire sphere over this period, plus some of Guosen's actions, gradually stabilized. Under the effect of the primitive atmosphere, even when it was directly facing the red star's full radiation, the temperature could be kept at around 70 degrees, and at night it wouldn't freeze everything solid like it used to. This was all thanks to the atmosphere. Meanwhile, at the North and South Poles, over time, giant blocks of ice gradually accumulated. He knew that now. The conditions for life to emerge were basically in place. Guosen was now looking forward to the arrival of a dirty snowball. The so-called dirty snowball was just like the meteorite that hit him. A very long time ago, a small celestial body carrying a lot of ice and snow-mixed matter. On these bodies, theoretically, some extremely simple, single-celled spores should exist. When a dirty snowball would arrive, was out of Guosen's control. Good luck doesn't come around often, but it doesn't never come either. Guosen was lucky. Right after he orbited his parent star, a few dozen times, he spotted a standard dirty snowball, heading straight for him. It was a meteorite about 50 meters in diameter. After passing through the thick atmosphere, it wasn't completely burned up. Instead, it hit an area right on the boundary between land and sea. Guosen immediately started observing it. After the dirty snowball hit the continental shelf, it caused a small earthquake, but things soon returned to calm. He really hoped there were actually spores inside it that could gradually develop into life. Full of anticipation, Guosen orbited the parent star again and again. His visual system worked like a high-powered microscope, allowing him to see extremely tiny objects. He would go over to that area from time to time to carefully look for any clues. But after a very long time, there seemed to be no change at all. Time passed gradually. Finally one day, Guosen, in the now warm area where the land meets the sea, found something completely different from before. They were countless organisms even smaller than a micron, with a single-cell nucleus. Some were just single-celled spheres. Others were shaped like cylinders. They were darting back and forth in the water non-stop. Oh, this is getting interesting. Guosen got completely excited. Those tiny life forms were like little bugs. Right now, under Guosen's watch, they were either wandering in the water, eating even smaller members of their own kind, or splitting from one cell into two cells. Guosen also noticed extremely tiny, light green semi-transparent single-celled organisms had appeared in the ocean. They clumped together, forming clusters of tiny green dots. They floated motionless in the shallow water, just like tiny algae. The previously active single-celled organisms were feeding on them. But this doesn't seem like what I imagined. Guosen thought, these little things are like sheep eating grass. The evolution of the single-celled organisms didn't seem to be as fast as he expected. Guosen orbited the parent star again and again. He felt like those little things hadn't changed much at all. Not only was there no evolution, even their distribution was limited to the area where the meteorite hit. Both their spread and evolution were too slow. Do I have to help them out? After thinking for a while, he decided to intervene with these little life forms. Otherwise, who knows how long he'd have to wait. Guosen used his powers to transport dozens of water droplets full of countless life forms to coastal areas with similar environments. This was the safest way to do it. If the organisms in the original area had some kind of accident and were completely wiped out, at least there would be some backups. Guosen repeated this process many times. He didn't want to do this, but he really hadn't expected that his own size was actually pretty big, and even the oceans were boundlessly huge. Am I bigger than Earth? Ugh, this is so tiring. After making thousands of backups, Guosen sighed. He fell into a deep sleep-like hibernation. Guosen thought that he hadn't been hibernating for too long, but when he woke up and went to check on those little life forms, he found that the originally simple single-celled organisms had suddenly changed quite a lot. They originally had only a single, simple shape and characteristics, but now they were all sorts of strange shapes. Almost every organism's size had increased by an incredible amount. If they were less than 1 micron before, now they were basically around dozens of microns big. Their previously almost transparent body color had now been replaced by bright varied colors, making each one look unique. As for the tiny algae-like plants he saw before, they had become much bigger now, even reaching nearly a millimeter in size. Their numbers were also extremely large, almost covering the entire coastal sea surface. Over a pretty large area, Guosen observed carefully and found those tiny moving single-celled organisms seemed to be divided into two major camps. One group was the algae-eating kind he had seen before. They made up the vast majority of the total. Most of them were green in color. Each of them swam very fast. They were almost all characterized by group activities. Their distinctive feature was a long whisker growing on their head. They almost always moved in groups. Very few of them acted alone. As for the other group, Posen thought their appearances were all extremely weird. Some were spherical, covered in spikes just like a hedgehog. Some had fangs that took up 2/3 of their body size. There were even small weirdos that were bright red all over, waving around pincer-like appendages. These creatures were very few in number, but none of them were easy to deal with. Their favorite thing to do seemed to be chasing those tiny algae-eating creatures, then piercing them and absorbing them as new nutrients. Of course, among themselves, they also seemed to be killing each other, even among identical members of the same species. Posen thought that was why their numbers were so low. He looked at the tiny creatures from the two camps. What immediately came to his mind was the relationship between wolves and rabbits back on Earth. On his sphere, predatory single-celled organisms seemed to have emerged, along with herbivorous single-celled organisms, probably because the temperature was just right. Posen felt that in this light green seawater, the nutrients seemed to be quite abundant. Whoa, this is pretty cool. Looks kind of interesting. But their evolution seems a bit slow. He watched dozens of groups he had placed earlier one after another, and they were all pretty much the same. The only slight difference was their appearance. Posen watched them as an observer. After watching for a long time, he found it a bit boring. Single-celled organisms only seemed to keep dividing. This method of reproduction was indeed very fast, but he watched for a long time and didn't notice any changes in these creatures at all. Sigh, if I could control these little guys, I might be able to make them change in different ways. As Posen thought this, he suddenly noticed a tiny algae-eating organism very close to him suddenly stop eating. The whisker that had been waving wildly also stopped moving entirely in an instant. Did it die? Posen wondered confusedly. It was perfectly fine just now. At that very moment, a nearby creature, with a forward-facing mouthpart, instantly sliced its body in two with its mouthpart, then absorbed it completely into its own body. Could it have stopped moving? Because I controlled it. Do I actually have the ability to control living things? No way. Posen thought to himself. As a joke, he tried to control the creature with the forward mouth part. To his surprise, it also stopped all movement instantly. Now it was Posen's turn to be stunned. No way. I really can not only control everything on my sphere, but even control living creatures. His confusion quickly turned into wild joy. Having discovered he had another ability, Posen watched as the originally carnivorous little creature followed his will and actually started eating algae. Is this a third-person game? Isn't this fun? He got very playful and started controlling the little creature to dash around everywhere, turning the entire biological colony upside down. Eventually, he even found he could control multiple creatures at once. At most, he could control over 1,000 of them at the same time. After playing like this for a while, Posen fell into deep thought again. If I can control them and speed up their evolution process, wouldn't that be a way? After all, these simple single-celled organisms are way too primitive. At this rate, it would take forever for intelligent life to evolve. That's way too long to wait. He vaguely remembered a fact he saw online, that it took from the first emergence of life to the appearance of humans about 3.5 billion years. That huge number was way too long for Posen to wait. How many orbits around the parent star would that take in 3.5 billion years? Just thinking about it made Posen feel exhausted. He was never a patient person who liked waiting anyway. Posen started making a plan. He would not only control these creatures to evolve quickly, but also make sure neither side gets too strong. If the balance is broken, everything might end up completely ruined. All living things would die out. The first thing he needed to do was to pick out the most unique individual. Among these single-celled organisms, among these special creatures, some might have dominant genes, others might have inferior genes. All of this required very careful screening. After screening them out, he would let them divide and reproduce in large numbers to expand their population, then pick out the most unique one again, and repeat the cycle. All right, let's go with this plan for now. If it fails, I have thousands of backups to keep testing with, but it's better if it works the first time. With that thought, Posen started using his ability to sort the carnivorous and herbivorous little creatures into simple categories first. This way, he could screen them in detail as thoroughly as possible. First, the carnivorous side. Their proportion of the total number was relatively smaller, and because of the fierce competition, they seem to have evolved in different directions. Most of them were red, so Posen named them the Little Reds. Posen quickly found some rather unique individuals among them. As for the herbivorous side, most of them were green and translucent. He named them the Little Greens. Screening the Little Greens was much more complicated and difficult. Their numbers were far too large, and their appearances were almost identical. It was really hard work to find the different ones. After spending some time, Posen still selected some from them to be test subjects. Next, what he needed to do was take control of these creatures, bring along a lot of algae, and migrate them all to another clean body of water. The migration went extremely smoothly. Posen used his ability to turn the water they were in into a round ball, floating in the air, and started moving it. This way, none of these little creatures got hurt or killed at all, and they arrived at the destination safely. All right, let's start the experiment. First, let these little guys start eating. He also brought a lot of regular little greens as food for these little reds. Otherwise, it would be bad if they ate those special little greens. As for the little greens, Posen had of course prepared plenty of algae for them. This way, neither side has to worry about food at all. The experiment is a little cruel, but to make these little guys evolve as fast as possible, this is a necessary sacrifice. The regular little greens had just been placed in the same area, eating the algae, when Posen controlled all the little reds to swim towards them frantically. There were about 3,000 regular little greens, and only 100 little reds in total. Judging from the reproduction speed he observed earlier, the little greens can divide 5 times, in just about an hour, while the little reds only divide once. This way, the numbers of both sides can be effectively controlled, so there won't be any imbalance that leads to a total collapse. All right, little reds, you go first. This is your journey of evolution. The weird-looking little reds under Posen's control gradually approach the carefree, algae-eating little greens that only keep absorbing nutrients. Only then can these creatures reproduce through fission to produce more dominant genes and achieve their great evolution in turn. As for how the little reds get nutrients, the only way is to eat those little greens. In previous observations, Posen had paid special attention to how exactly the carnivorous little reds hunt. They almost entirely rely on their sharp spines, large pincers, or saw-like mouth parts as weapons to catch prey. After a successful attack on prey, they drive their straw-like mouth parts into the prey's body, sucking out all sorts of substances inside. Their overemphasis on offensive abilities and slow speed caused by their relatively large size are also their fatal flaws. Posen observed that usually a single little red needs to eat at least 4 little greens before it starts to reproduce through fission. These dumb guys also often get eaten by their own kind. Right, when they are in the middle of fission reproduction. That makes their evolutionary progress even slower. This is also the aspect Posen is eager to change for them. After all, evolutionary speed is the top priority. Compared to the little reds, the little greens not only swim faster, they also reproduce at an extremely fast rate. Posen observed that the population of these little creatures seems to be growing exponentially. This has a lot to do with the overgrown algae and other plants here. Abundant food keeps the little green population expanding non-stop. Even after being hunted so heavily by the little reds earlier, they have never been wiped out. Posen took action. He controlled all the little reds to start a hunting spree. That's it. Under his control, the little reds were even more agile than before, like a pack of wolves with lightning speed. The little reds quickly swam towards an area where groups of little greens were busy eating algae, completely unaware. Then they deployed their respective weapons and surrounded the little greens in an instant. Under Posen's control, their original flaw of clumsy movements was completely gone. Fast, steady, precise, ruthless. Right after the little reds caught 1 little green each, Posen released his control over them. After freezing for a second, the little reds killed and ate up the little greens in their own ways. The little greens that luckily escaped the attack, scattered in all directions right now. Some even hid among the algae to cover themselves, or swam further away to lie low. If this had happened before, when faced with this situation, the little reds would have great difficulty catching the little greens again. After Posen repeated this process of letting them hunt and eat a few times, he felt this speed was still a bit too slow. Controlling the little reds over and over again to eat the little greens was still taking too much time. Don't blame me for this. It's all for the sake of evolution. Bosun instantly took control of a bunch of little greens and delivered them right to the mouths of the little reds. Food right in front of you? There's no reason not to enjoy it. The little reds kept receiving the great gifts Bosun sent their way. Before long, all the little reds suddenly, as if by prior agreement, spread out to positions far apart from each other, and right after that, they all started fission. The fission process is just like someone sliced right through the middle of their body. Both ends stretch out. The middle part shrinks inward, looking just like a peanut. The nucleus inside gradually splits into two, and in the end, even the entire body splits completely apart. That's exactly how it works. Keep going, keep going. All in all, and he's very satisfied. This counts as completing the first fission experiment. A successful first step. He did a full check, only to find that, among the newly split little reds, there didn't seem to be any individual with even the slightest bit of mutation. Bosun noticed that, on the side of the ordinary little greens, they also started fission reproduction almost at the same time. With his intervention, the fission speed of the little reds was already faster than that of the little greens. Bosun knew success wouldn't come that fast. If he kept repeating this process, sooner or later a little red with special genes would be born. And so, Bosun patiently repeated the process dozens more times. But oddly enough, forget evolving, the little reds. Some of them even seemed to be regressing. Their spines got shorter, their pincers got smaller. Only their population was growing steadily. Weird, why is that? He was a bit confused. He thought with his intervention, evolution would go faster. He never expected that. Apart from the population size, they were actually developing in the opposite direction. Bosun looked over to another area where the special little greens are kept, completely free range. They were eating algae while playfully messing around with each other. Their population was already quite large by now, without being hunted by the little reds. These creatures were living way too carefree lives. They did nothing but eat and reproduce through fission nonstop. Bosun searched through the group for a while, and actually found quite a few individuals completely different from before. He picked out a few of them, and observed them carefully. The changes in these few in front of him were actually quite obvious. Probably to grab food faster. They evolved jet structures at their tails. They even grew 2 flagella instead of 1. Their bodies, which were previously cylindrical, gradually became much smoother. Their heads got a bit pointier, and their overall shape became spindle-like. All these features provided conditions for their high speed, but Bosun was even more confused now. The little reds he painstakingly controlled showed no changes, yet the free-range little greens mutated. Where on earth did he go wrong? Bosun pondered this question for quite a long time, unable to figure it out no matter how hard he thought. He turned back to look at the area of water where the meteorite first landed. Then something that shocked him to the core happened, whether it was the little reds or the little greens. Although their changes were relatively slow, they had all mutated somewhat. Some of the little reds even seemed to be much larger than before. Also in the water, there seemed to be far more tiny single-celled organisms. The number of single-celled organisms was even larger, and their species were more diverse as well. They even expanded the area of water they occupied by a lot. This made Bosun even more confused. Active intervention did almost nothing, yet the free-range ones mutated first. That's totally absurd. Why on earth is that? He circled the mother planet many times, thinking about this question the whole time. After thinking for ages and getting nowhere, when Bosun went to check on his test subjects again, he found they had mutated again. The selected little reds, without his control, were still as clumsy as before, hunting and killing each other among the ordinary little greens, just like the little greens in other areas. Some individuals actually started evolving. What the hell? Bosun went to check on the special little greens again, to see how they had changed, only to find that only a few hundred of the special little greens were left. No matter how hard he searched that area of water, he couldn't find more. Where did they all go? There were at least tens of thousands of them before. At first he thought he had remembered the location wrong, but he searched the entire surrounding area thoroughly, and still couldn't find any more of them. A bit frustrated, Bosun fell into deep thought. He suddenly remembered a story. In a wildlife reserve in a certain country, there was a herd of deer and a pack of wolves. To protect the deer, people killed all the wolves. It looks extremely barren. Later, wolves were reintroduced into the reserve, and the deer herd started to thrive again. The situation of these special little greens is just like that deer herd, isn't it? Without competitive pressure? After reproducing rapidly, these creatures gradually regressed and headed towards extinction. Oh, Bosun started to reflect on his mistakes. He realized he'd oversimplified things at the very beginning. Or rather, he'd underestimated the concept of evolution. Evolution requires far more time and a much freer environment. Forcing intervention will only backfire, leading to the degradation or even extinction of the species. But if he doesn't take the initiative to intervene, their evolutionary speed is far too slow. Guosen thought, proper scientific and effective intervention is necessary. For this purpose, he has to run a number of controlled experiments at the same time. Luckily, earlier on, he made over 1,000 backups just to be safe. That gives him plenty of room for error. All right, no time to wallow in regret. Let's check the status of all the backups first. Then we'll keep doing trial and error to find the right path forward. Guosen thought to himself and started checking all the backups across the globe. This process was a little tedious, but he did his best to be thorough. He memorized every single cell cluster carefully, entering all their features into his now far more powerful mind. But after making the full round, Guosen also came to a conclusion. Aside from the small section he was testing, the other 2,000 plus clusters were pretty much the same. The little reds were evolving very slowly, while the little greens seemed to be evolving faster. The number of unique individuals was gradually increasing, even showing a tendency to replace the original population. Guosen knew this was survival of the fittest, the law of nature. So what I need to do is first use the 5 entire populations as test fields, apply different interventions to each one in turn, and then see how things go. With that thought, Guosen had already returned to the area next to the meteorite, the place where life first began. He looked at the population that had already been developing and reproducing incredibly rapidly, and made up his mind. Guosen started his new experiment. First, he needed to select a batch of faster evolving populations from each of the 5 shallow waters that originally had complete ecosystems. This was incredibly easy for him. Soon, 5 water droplets teeming with life were extracted from each of the shallow waters by him. He then placed them in 5 bodies of water with almost identical environments, connected to each other, but not too close to one another. That wraps up the first step. Guosen stayed calm. He didn't immediately interfere with the little creatures' ecosystems. He wanted to let the little guys adapt to their new environment first. Unlike last time, he didn't completely separate the special little reds from the special little greens. Instead, he mixed them together, just like they were originally. These little creatures didn't seem to notice any change in their environment at all. They still did everything they used to do, eating and splitting. At the same time, the algae that the little greens feed on, which came along with them, were now starting to take over this body of water. Guosen thought these algae were probably the common ancestor of all the plants that would later colonize the land and the oceans. With the right temperature and sunlight, these algae seemed to be growing very quickly. Even though the little greens had a huge population and split fast enough, they couldn't keep up with how fast the algae were spreading. All right, let's move on to the next step. After some time, once Guosen waited for them to adapt to the environment, he started the second step. The 5 populations needed 5 different intervention methods. Zone 1, fully intervene with a portion of the little reds. Make them only focus on eating and splitting, and stop attacking each other. Zone 2, fully intervene with a portion of the little greens. Speed up their eating and splitting rate. Cut down the time they spend on other things. Zone 3, shrink the living space. For all the little reds and little greens, Zone 4, expand their living space. Zone 5 is the one that needs careful management. Guosen will intervene with both groups, but not like the first failed attempt, where he intervened completely. Instead, he will pick one individual from each group, make them eat and split according to his plan, and see if that affects the others. Of the 5 methods, Zones 3 and 4 won't take much effort. Guosen only needs to control their activity range. As for the remaining 3, Guosen thinks Zone 5 will take the most effort. He first looked at Zone 1. This zone was almost exactly the same as the previous experiment, but he decided to go faster this time. Guosen directly took control of a portion of the little reds, like controlling hundreds of hungry wolf packs, heading straight for the algae area where the little greens gathered. Very quickly, the little reds controlled by Guosen each caught a little green and started devouring them. The little greens, as if they hadn't fully realized what was happening. Some of them were still foolishly nibbling on the algae. After repeating this a few times, The little reds started splitting. Looking at the remaining little reds, still clumsily catching little greens, even when the controlled little reds split for the second time. Some of them hadn't even finished splitting once. Gosen finished one round of experiments in Zone 1. He looked over at Zone 2. In Zone 2, he needed to control a portion of the little greens, but he had a new idea right then. He placed the selected little greens very, very close to the little reds and waited for these hunters to attack. The little reds saw the food come right to their door and charged forward instinctively. Gosen immediately controlled the little greens to dodge quickly. The little reds that pounced and missed looked completely confused, all stopping there motionless. Gosen controlled the little greens to hover in front of them again. The little reds pounced and missed again. After repeating this cycle many times, those little reds went to attack the far more easy-to-catch little greens further away. Gosen was thoughtful. This was a bit unexpected for him. He had previously thought the little reds would keep attacking the little greens closer to them. He didn't expect these guys would actually be flexible enough to know to back off when facing difficulties. But will this affect the evolution of both groups? Gosen wasn't sure. Right at this moment, he suddenly noticed a very large meteorite in space, flying towards him at high speed. It's messing things up right now. Gosen can only affect his own planet, and can't do anything about those meteorites. If this meteorite just had to hit the test subjects, the meteorite got closer and closer. Gosen roughly calculated its size. It seemed to be as big as 1/50 of his planet. This thing must have been pulled in by his own gravity. If it hits the land or the ocean, forget about the little creatures. Everything on his entire planet will cease to exist. Wait, gravity. Gosen suddenly realized something. He can affect himself. What if he increases his own gravity? Gosen then adjusted the gravity at his core. During this process, he suddenly noticed the orbit of the originally straight-coming meteorite suddenly shifted as if it had been hit and turned a corner. Whoa. Gosen watched as it got closer and closer to him, but at a relatively safe distance, it traced an arc. The arc was quite irregular at first. As time passed, it gradually changed from an oval shape to a circle. Its rotation also slowed down and stabilized, and finally it ended up always facing him with the same side. Gosen also started carefully observing this uninvited guest. It was an almost pure white asteroid, even bigger than he had previously estimated. Its surface was very smooth, without that many craters. Its shape was very interesting. The sphere wasn't a regular circle, but an oblate spheroid. The top and bottom ends were relatively flat, while there was a strange bulge around the center. There were an unusual number of wrinkles on it, probably a range of mountains circling the center of the asteroid. From Gosen's perspective, this guy looks like a big white dumpling. Haha, is this dumpling actually my satellite? Gosen felt a little smug. He never expected he would actually have a satellite. Obviously, he is the satellite of that green gas planet over there. A moon of a moon. This amazing celestial structure just formed like that. But right at this moment, Gosen suddenly noticed, on the surface of his sphere, the originally extremely calm seawater suddenly started churning with violent waves. Some places even saw tsunamis as high as dozens of meters. The deep blue seawater rolled with waves, constantly slamming against the land. The spray was splashing everywhere. Wait, I thought something felt off. So that's what it is. Waves, it's the waves. He was extremely delighted about this, but very soon, that delight turned into worry. Oh no, my creatures. Gosen thought of them. There are nearly 2,000 large biological colonies across the globe. He did a full check. He found that waving with the waves. Earlier, he had stored the backups, almost all in shallow water very close to the coast. And because of that, the surging waves took these tiny little creatures and slammed them onto the land. When the water receded, most of them were left stranded on the shore. They died right on the spot. Gosen had no time to grieve. He immediately started collecting remaining life records. In the end, he even searched the entire planet and found that the total number left wasn't much at all. With a nervous heart, he looked toward the location of the 5 experimental plots. Luckily, the 5 biological gathering areas were completely unharmed. Gosen breathed a sigh of relief. He had placed them there by accident back then, putting them relatively far from the land. He never expected that this move would actually save these little guys. Ugh, what a series of messes. Should I move them to some safer place? Gosen thought. He couldn't let them experience the cruelty of nature again, An unexpected incident once in a while could easily wipe out all these fragile creatures. He decided to create a safer environment. After thinking it over again and again, he decided to build a saltwater lake, connected to the ocean, but a certain distance away, located in a safe zone that wouldn't be affected by waves. He acted on his idea right away. Guozhen knew very well. On the original Earth, things like tsunamis sometimes occur for all kinds of reasons. If by chance these little guys get caught up in one, all the work I've done before will go to waste. He searched for a while and finally confirmed the location. It was a crater not too far. From this ocean, the crater was nearly 10 kilometers in diameter, and the distance from the ocean was only about 5 kilometers. Guozhen didn't clumsily carry the salt water from the ocean into it bit by bit. Instead, he decided to make a path between the crater and the ocean. This was nothing at all for Guozhen. He easily split the land into a crack dozens of meters wide and created a slope. The surging seawater obediently flowed along the crack and poured into the crater. More and more seawater poured in, gradually filling up the originally deep crater until it was completely level with the sea surface. Guozhen took a look and thought it was good enough. Guozhen thought for a while in seawater and transported them smoothly to their new home. As for the remaining ones, Guozhen originally wanted to pack all of them and put them in the lake too, but after thinking again, he finally gave up that idea. He only transported 10% of them to the lake and placed them a little far from the experimental zones. The rest need to feel the cruelty of nature. Guozhen can't split his attention to take care of too many things. After all, even though he has become this almost omnipotent planet, the things he can do are still very limited. He has to put his limited energy into the little guys he is protecting. The experiment has to continue. So much was lost. He still has to start over. Guozhen's previous experimental observation process had been interrupted and delayed for quite a long time by the asteroid that has now become a satellite. How are the experimental subjects doing now? He first looked toward Zone 1. It has been a very long time since the last round of experiments was completed. How have they changed? Guozhen observed carefully. He was surprised to find that the little reds he had originally controlled had now become extremely scarce in number, and every one of them looked as if they were malnourished. Their size had shrunk a lot, and the changes in the little greens shocked Guozhen immensely. Their speed was more than twice as fast as when Guozhen first observed them, and their number had also expanded many times over. He observed that the splitting speed of these little guys seemed surprisingly fast, and their size was also much larger than before. Guozhen thought for a long time but couldn't figure it out. What exactly went wrong here? He looked toward Zone 2 again. Here, whether it was the little reds or the little greens, barely any were left. That's weird. Could it be from the previous waves? No, that can't be right. If that was the case, all of them would have been washed away. Confused, Guozhen looked toward the remaining 3 zones. These hadn't been intervened in time because of the sudden incident with the big dumpling asteroid. Their current condition was exactly the same as before. Each area maintained a balanced state. Guozhen thought for a very long time and found this really hard to understand. After all, during that long period of time, he hadn't continued any intervention. Could there be some other factors interfering with what's going on inside? Guozhen decided to restart the experiment. This time, since Zone 3 and 4 didn't change much, no matter whether they expanded or narrowed their living range, the only difference was just their population size. Guozhen decided to set up 3 experimental zones this time. He wanted to take a good look at what exactly happened to Zone 1 and Zone 2. But this time he didn't handle them one by one. He changed to a different method. He had noticed earlier that he could repeatedly control a portion of the single-celled organisms. What would happen if he controlled 3 zones at the same time? The answer was, of course, yes. He could control them simultaneously. It just cost a little more energy. This would also make the experiment more scientific. Controlling them at the same time could also speed up the evolution process. That is, if his intervention could actually make them evolve. Guozhen looked toward Zone 1 and controlled a batch of little reds while also controlling the little greens in Zone 2 at the same time, just like he did before. As for Zone 3, he hadn't done any experiments on it before, so he would try a tentative experiment this time. Guozhen focused his attention on Zone 3, that is, control 1 little red and 1 little green each, to see if their actions would affect both groups. The little red he controlled was a guy that looked a lot like a hedgehog, covered in spines that were very intimidating. To make it easier to remember, Kusern named it Little Spiky. Another thing, Gosern also noticed this kind of little red, because of its almost invincible defensive spines, was less likely to be eaten by other little reds. This was also an advantage, forcing him to follow an irregular circle. When he wasn't paying attention for a moment, he immediately controlled Little Spiky to chase away the little greens that were like a flock of sheep, and quickly scattered the ones that were gathered around eating green algae, except of course for the little green he was controlling himself. The little green he controlled is a guy with 2 flagella that moves extremely fast. He calls this guy a Fae. A Fae's role is to constantly stir up trouble among the little red colonies, to draw their attention, then get away quickly with his agile speed. Soon the 1 red and 1 green turn this small area upside down. Under Gosen's control, the 2 little guys each perform their own duties, going all out to stir things up. They left both sides dumbfounded right at the beginning. On one side, the little reds are running around a Fae. On the other, Little Spiky is chasing countless little greens. Soon, Zone 3 was in total chaos. But this chaos only lasted for a while. The situation fell back into the same state Zones 1 and 2 were in before. The little reds gave up chasing a Fae and turned to other little greens. The little greens that escaped from Little Spiky also started eating like crazy and dividing rapidly. This is literally a combination of what happened in Zones 1 and 2. Bosen looked up and noticed Zones 1 and 2 were also, almost at the same time, back to the state they were in before the meteorite arrived. All in all, the current progress seems to be completely under his control. As for why in the end, the little greens in Zone 1 exploded in number, while those in Zone 2 almost went extinct. What exactly happened in there? Bosen kept a close eye on Zones 1 and 2. He had to find out the reason for this outcome. After all, what will happen in Zone 3 is still unknown. Bosen kept orbiting the parent star. Time passed gradually during this process. Zones 1 and 2, which he was watching closely, had already started to change. Over in Zone 1, Bosen noticed that the little reds started dividing after eating frantically, which caused their population to grow exponentially. Their existence even threatened the other uncontrolled little reds. The little greens that survived, the vicious little reds under his control, seemed to have developed a strong sense of crisis. Their dividing speed increased by a lot. Bosen calculated carefully, even though the little reds' dividing speed was already fast enough. The evolved dividing speed of these little greens was even twice as fast as theirs. The surviving little greens no longer divided like they did before. Their size change was less obvious. Instead, they were evolving to be smaller, and some of them showed a tendency to spread to farther areas. As time went by, the ordinary little reds, who had less and less food, started killing each other, tearing and eating their own kind. They also attacked the large number of little reds controlled by Guo-sen. Soon the number of little reds started to drop drastically. Even their dividing speed couldn't keep up with the speed at which they were killing each other. As for evolution, Guo-sen could see that the ones he controlled didn't evolve at all. They even degenerated quite a bit. Both their speed and attacking power were no match for the ordinary wild little reds, so they fled. The little greens that fled to distant areas, as they kept eating and dividing, gradually restored their population to its original size. They even relied on the seaweed that had become a huge group in this shallow water area, and gradually expanded their habitat as food was sufficient, and grew into an even larger population. Time passed gradually. There were barely any little reds left, since they were far away from the little greens' habitat. They started dying off continuously. The dead little reds became food for the remaining ones. It was a vicious cycle. Bosen sighed inwardly. He understood what exactly had happened in Zone 1 during that blank period. At the same time, Zone 2 had also evolved into a state where neither the little reds nor the little greens had many survivors left. Just like before, Bosen had watched the entire development process. The huge population of little greens from their rapid reproduction was a feast for the little reds. With plenty of food, the little reds also started dividing like crazy. But once the little reds' population grew too large, they killed more and more little greens. The subsequent development was even worse than that in Zone 1. Only a handful of little greens survived being eaten, and they didn't have time to spread to farther areas. Then the little reds started killing each other again. The end result was that both sides suffered heavy losses. Guo-sen also understood by this point there was no need to continue the experiment in Zones 1 and 2. The results showed he had failed. He looked towards Zone 3. The development here seemed to be moving towards the best possible outcome. Guosun had noticed before that, in the original colonies, the population ratio of little reds to little greens was around 1.9. That was the optimal ratio to keep their population balanced. Amazingly, after such a long time, Zone 3 could still maintain this ratio perfectly. This was all thanks to Little Spiky, who constantly patrolled the area, and a Fae who kept stirring things up. Little Spiky's pursuit once reduced the number of little greens that were constantly hiding by a large amount. They gradually recovered later, but their speed had improved significantly. Their body shape gradually evolved into a spindle shape. They even grew symmetrical cilia on both sides of their bodies. This allowed them to swim much faster. When moving through water, they were relatively smaller in size, and their color was closer to the green of algae. This also allowed them to hide in the seaweed to survive attacks from the little reds. As for the little reds, their changes seemed even greater. Among these predators, there were originally all kinds of strange shapes. Looking at them now, there seemed to be even more varieties, but all of them seemed to be putting all their effort into evolving better weapons. Those with spikes grew longer spikes, and their bodies became larger. Those with fangs in their mouths grew more teeth, which were also sharper. Some even evolved frantically for higher speed. They had a similar body size to the little greens, with spikes growing on one side, using their speed to cut open nearby little greens' bodies to hunt. As for Little Spiky and a Fae, Guosen was sad to find that, even though these two kept dividing, they were gradually degenerating. They were even evolving towards more primitive forms. So far, the experiment seems to be very successful. However, no matter how much or how fast the single-celled organisms evolve, they don't seem to be able to become multi-celled organisms quickly. Guosen looked at the other naturally developing colonies in the saltwater lake. Their evolution speed was far behind that of the colonies here. The experiment was successful for now. Bosun's intervention had made the evolution level of the single-celled organisms in Zone 3 much higher. But exactly how much time this had sped up the process couldn't be determined in a short time. Bosun decided to step away from the experiment for a while. After doing so many things, he was a bit tired. He always thought he was really weird. How could he, as a planet, always want to take a nap? He shut down his visual system again and fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how much time passed when Bosun woke up again. He originally wanted to check on how the little guys in the saltwater lake were doing, but he suddenly noticed something strange. The originally bare, pitch-black land in some areas near the water source had suddenly turned bright green. No way, seriously. Bosun zoomed in his view with endless anticipation. They were clusters of sparse, extremely short moss-like plants growing near the water. They grew in a simple and messy pattern. While growing close to the ground, they kept spreading their growing tendrils in all directions, growing thicker and thicker. Bosun originally thought that algae-like plants would be the only plants on his planet. For a very long time, he never expected that. They would actually successfully move onto land while he was asleep. After a burst of wild joy, also noticed another change on the land. It was on both sides of the rivers and the soil near the coastline. Bosun had been paying too much attention to those tiny creatures before, that he even forgot about other things. All kinds of changes on the land didn't get much of his attention. He thought carefully, this soil should be formed by the alluvial action of rivers and oceans, and weathering working together. The soil formed is basically made of fine, granular, crushed stone powder. There's not a single bit of humus in it. It looks extremely barren. Only those little moss-like things can barely take root here. But the reason why those little mosses are short and sparse also proves how barren the soil is. Bosun carefully searched through his mind for memories of knowledge about soil on Earth, but didn't come up with much. He only vaguely remembered that fertile soil is formed by years of weathering combined with humus transformed from plants. It seems that we really can't rush things right now. After all, being anxious won't help at all. Even if he takes out all the algae on the entire sphere and rolls them into a ball, it probably won't be enough to make a few square meters of fertile soil, let alone spread them all over the entire globe. To make fertile soil, Bosun set his sights on the saltwater lake. He had to check what was going on over there. After all, that was the most important place. But after just one glance, he was shocked by what he saw. There seemed to be new creatures appearing in Experiment Zone 3. Bosun didn't know how to describe these wonderful creatures in front of him that were several millimeters long. Weird, bizarre, Chimera, these words kept popping up in his mind. A relatively large gray creature with a slender body like a centipede and spikes on both sides of its body was being chased by a much smaller creature that spurted purple smoke from its mouth and had terrifying long fangs. It was running away like crazy, but before long, its escape route was blocked by several small, fast-moving, spherical monsters. The spherical monsters each extended their spike-like straws hidden inside their bodies and easily punctured the centipede monster's body. The fang monster that arrived right after quickly bit the centipede monster into several pieces. Soon a number of small monsters with different appearances gathered around again, as if they all wanted a piece of the pie. It didn't take long for the many small monsters to completely dismember the centipede monster. Then they started killing each other again. More centipede monsters in the distance quickly swam further away, eating the algae that seemed to have been magnified hundreds of times. There were also some small, transparent spindle-shaped creatures that looked like small fish, constantly swimming among the algae, eating the tender shoots inside. Bosun looked at everything in front of him and could barely believe his eyes. What is going on here? Where did the previous little reds and little greens go? What on earth did I miss while I was asleep? Bosun searched the entire saltwater lake once and did find single-celled organisms just like the little reds and little greens back then, but their numbers weren't very large. They didn't live in their original location. Instead, they were driven to the area near the center of the lake by those little monsters that were dozens of times larger than them. The habitat of the little monsters had also expanded from less than 1 square meter back then to even all the space along the lake shore. Bosun caught a centipede monster and a fang monster and put them in another water area for careful observation. Then he found an unexpected fact. These two guys weren't simple single-celled organisms. They were complex multicellular organisms, made up of several cells. Bosun jolted suddenly and started thinking about how many years he had slept. How come the whole world changed all of a sudden? Multicellular organisms just popped out like that. He quickly raised his sight to observe the entire sphere, but he found it a bit unfamiliar. The ice sheets at the north and south poles were much thicker than he remembered. Countless glaciers had even formed, and it seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. The ice area also seemed to be much larger than before. There were even signs of them spreading further north and south, respectively. On the other hand, the volcanoes at the plate boundaries were also restless. They kept spewing magma and gas, and grew taller and taller. The plateau Bosun had created before was just like the north and south poles. Covered with white snow, the ice and snow also gave birth to countless rivers that continuously poured water into the ocean. The water vapor rising from the ocean was carried by the wind and formed precipitation on the plains and snowfall on the plateau. The water cycle gradually formed along with this process. The atmosphere also gradually stabilized. Its thickness increased further. Even if some small meteorites hit occasionally, they would be completely destroyed by it. Except for the lack of greenery, everything was almost just like on Earth. Bosun looked at all this and could barely believe it was his own doing. How many things had happened during the time he was asleep? It seemed like the original desolate and lifeless planet had never existed at all. But Bosun also felt a little excited at the same time. Everything was going smoother than expected. More advanced life forms might appear one after another in the near future. He looked up at the parent star that seemed almost eternal. He found that the big red spot from the asteroid impact he had seen on it before had almost completely disappeared. He couldn't help but smile to himself. Those things clearly felt like they happened just yesterday. He had fallen asleep. It seemed that a really long time had indeed passed. Bosun's sight focused on the big dumpling again. As his moon, this guy seemed to be doing his duty very well. Bosun saw that this white guy, which had a very smooth surface, when it first arrived, now had quite a lot of craters on its body. It seemed that during the time he was asleep, it had withstood quite fierce bombardment from outer space. The meteorites seemed to have had their trajectories disrupted by this guy's gravity that were originally heading towards Bosun's orbit. At the same time, it protected his sphere from being bombarded, which would have dealt a blow to the hard-earned biological community that had been established. But Bosun always felt that the distance between this guy and himself was much closer than before, as if it was being gradually pulled over. With that thought, Bosun reduced his own gravity and pushed the big dumpling's orbit outward a little. But unexpectedly, this guy got further and further away from him. Its orbit also drew a weird arc. Bosun stared at the parent star opposite and immediately knew what had happened to the big dumpling. It was being constantly pulled by the parent star's gravity, and might become the parent star's satellite. How could Bosun let that happen? Without the big dumpling, the seawater on his sphere would no longer have tidal phenomena. It might even affect more things, who knows? That bastard parent star is stealing my little brother. Bosun couldn't help but increase his own gravity, and started competing with the parent star for control of the big dumpling. This process was extremely difficult. Under the tug of war between the parent star and Bosun, the big dumpling didn't seem to be having an easy time either. Even part of its star body gradually cracked. The cracked rocks on its body even flew into outer space. After a deadlock for quite a long time, maybe because the big dumpling wasn't too far away from him, or maybe for other reasons, it finally gradually broke free from the strong gravity of the parent star, and gradually started revolving around him again. Bosun couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief in his mind. He really didn't expect that a single thought of his almost made him lose something important. He adjusted his gravity, and the big dumpling slowly returned to its normal orbit. But Bosun was still a little surprised. Why did the big dumpling get closer and closer to me before? What on earth happened? After resolving the accident, Guosen turned his attention back to those little guys that have evolved into multicellular organisms. Their safety is what he cares about most. But he was surprised to find the original saltwater lake had suddenly vanished. Guosen carefully compared the coordinates of the saltwater lake's location in his memory. What he saw instead was a shallow bay submerged by seawater. During the fight over the big dumpling, a tsunami just happened to hit that area. Oh shit, that's bad. Guosen hurriedly searched that area for those multicellular organisms, but these things are less than a millimeter long. They're really not easy to find, especially in this boundless ocean. Guosen searched almost all the nearby coastlines, and near the estuary of a river, he found a small group. No matter how hard he looked for the rest, Guosen couldn't find them anywhere. Maybe they were washed by the tide further onto land, and then burned to death by the sun. Or maybe they were carried by the ocean to the deep sea. He never expected that dealing with the big dumpling would end up causing this kind of trouble for him. Guosen thought he was actually pretty lucky. At least every time such a big accident happened, those little guys were tough enough to survive, instead of getting wiped out that easily. That was something that gave him a lot of comfort. Looking at the few hundred multicellular organisms that only existed within a few square meters of the river estuary, Guosen also realized he seemed to have quite a lot of work to do. The first thing to do is build another saltwater lake. Once you've done this kind of work once, it's no longer difficult. Especially for someone like Guosen, he found that his telekinesis, or this superpower-like ability, could do almost anything, as long as he was on his own planet. Guosen soon found a crater. What's special about this crater is that it seems to be a collapse formed by several connected craters. Its area is extremely large, more than 100 kilometers in diameter. Guosen estimated this location is about 10 kilometers away from the coast. It should be safer than the previous one. At least it won't be easily destroyed by tsunamis or floods and the like. He quickly created a wide crack here, leading all the way to the ocean. The surging seawater followed this crack and poured into the huge crater. The seawater quickly covered this whole area. Blown by the strong wind, the blue lake water started lapping against the shore. But Guosen still wasn't fully reassured. He adjusted the height of the land, dozens of meters outside the lake shore, creating a solid, airtight wall. Nearly 20 meters high, this added an extra layer of protection for the entire saltwater lake. Then Guosen went to some rocky hills not far away and brought back a large number of stones. Placing them on the shore, what he wanted to do was shorten the formation process of primitive soil to save time, so that the lake shore would have the foundation to grow plants. If he waited for the lake water to erode slowly, God knows how long it would take. Guosen lifted countless boulders using his telekinesis and instantly crushed them into sand-like powder. He then spread this thick layer over the lake shore. Then he shifted his gaze and searched for a while. He found some moss on the riverbanks. That hadn't been submerged by the previous tide. These tough little creatures also need protection and breeding support. Otherwise, who knows when an accident would completely wipe out these guys that finally made it to land. Guosen carefully took some samples from several moss colonies, moved them along with the soil clods to the lake shore, and planted them at regular intervals. That completed the basic greening work for now. After finishing all this, he gathered all the little creatures from the estuary together and put them all into the new saltwater lake. The little creatures barely noticed that their habitat had changed. They adapted to the lake water very quickly, and even started reproducing right away. The first thing Guosen noticed was that the one starting to reproduce was a creature he'd seen before. It had a long, thin body like a centipede, with spines on both sides. Their population seemed to be the largest in this entire biological community. They almost all lurked around the seaweed, slow-moving and large in size. Guosen saw this centipede-like monster move away from the predator's hunting range by a relatively secluded patch of seaweed. It stuck out a tentacle. The body wall of the tentacle extended outward, splitting into 5 small, translucent branched tentacles. They looked like miniature versions of the centipede monster. As time passed, the branched tentacles gradually grew, looking almost identical to the parent. Finally, the connecting part narrowed, detached from the parent, and stuck to the seaweed. It looks a bit like fission reproduction, but not quite. What exactly is this? Just as Guosen was thinking, as fast as lightning, the parent was suddenly cut in half horizontally. Right after that, a little monster with scissor-sharp mouthparts. At the still-moving section of the centipede monster's body, it dove several more times, cutting it into several more sections. Soon, like sharks that smelled blood, many carnivorous little monsters that were originally far away swam over together and started feasting around the centipede monster's corpse. After a while, Guosen saw these villains start killing each other again. The seaweed side that was so calm and peaceful just now had turned into a battlefield of slaughter. A terrifying aura filled the air. Time passed slowly. The carnivorous little monsters finally left. There wasn't even a scrap left of the big centipede monster. The only ones left were the 5 little centipede monsters deep in the seaweed. The little centipede monsters didn't grow slowly. It didn't take long for them to start eating the seaweed around them. Their size got closer and closer to that of adults. A few that occasionally swam out were unfortunately hunted by the carnivores. The survivors started a new round of reproduction again. Guosen watched all this and felt the cruelty of nature. At the same time, he also felt immense awe for the cycle of life. He circled the mother planet many more times. He wanted to let time pass so that the biological population in the lake could expand as soon as possible. The current small number is totally insufficient, not nearly enough for him to conduct new experiments. Guosen knew very well. He knew that to make these little guys evolve quickly, he had to intervene effectively like he did last time. Otherwise, who knows how long it would take for them to make any progress. After some more time passed, Guosen looked back at the saltwater lake and found that the lakeshore surrounded by tall rocks had suddenly turned completely light green. Guosen's heart immediately leapt with joy. It went without saying that it was the moss. He leaned in closer and observed carefully. From a distance, it looked like a patch of green, but up close, it wasn't that dense. It was almost the same as the kind Guosen had seen by the sea before. Even the species were almost identical. He looked at these with delight, and then checked the distribution of moss across the entire planet. Guosen spent some time and came to a conclusion. The reproductive ability of this moss seemed quite astonishing. As long as there is water, as long as the place is connected to the sea, they can grow and reproduce tenaciously, spreading that tender green color, even if the soil has almost no nutrients at all. Guosen really hopes these mosses can accelerate their evolution and slowly cover the entire planet with green. In the process of multiplying and thriving, a layer of fertile soil gradually forms. All of this requires the polish of time to change. Guosen can intervene with those little red and green creatures, but there's nothing he can do about plants. The maximum he can achieve is to gradually extend their habitat further inland. Of course, he has a lot of work to do for this. For example, grinding countless hard rocks into powder to make the most basic leveled soil, while continuously crushing rocks and producing soil. Guosen also didn't forget to observe the tiny creatures in the saltwater lake. During this period, they have reproduced a considerable number of populations. The initial area they occupied after being placed by the lake was less than 10 square meters. Right now, they have grown to control nearly 100 square meters of territory, and it is still expanding. As for the algae with super strong reproductive ability, they have even stretched their reach to positions near the lake center, floating on the water surface. They have gradually dyed the azure lake water green. At the lake bottom near the shore, some aquatic plants as thin as needles have also grown, waving with the waves. Guosen even saw that some multicellular organisms also inhabit here. This is a phenomenon that didn't exist before. Near the lake center, Guosen also found a considerable number of single-celled organisms. swimming around non-stop, just like the original little red and green creatures. But there seemed to be far more varieties. Gosen was delighted to see that this small ecosystem, under the baptism of time, is constantly repairing itself and growing continuously, gradually filling the entire saltwater lake with vitality. He put so much effort into this. This is the reward. With a feeling of relief, Gosen carefully looked at his main target. The number of those multicellular organisms was already sufficient. He could start the experiment again to make these little guys start the process of accelerated evolution once more. Unexpectedly, it seemed that more types of multicellular organisms had already appeared in the lake water. Gosen counted them. Compared to before, there were as many as over 20 species of carnivorous multicellular organisms. As for herbivorous multicellular organisms, even without counting carefully, there were nearly 100 species. He was very excited. Life seemed to be striding forward in a more prosperous direction. However, this also caused some difficulties for the experiment he was going to conduct. Should he select a small portion for the experiment, or include all of them? Gosen hesitated for a while and decided to include all the multicellular organisms in the experiment. Collective coevolution compared to individual evolution can make the entire ecosystem more balanced. He soon selected 2 lucky subjects. From the carnivorous multicellular organisms, he picked a strange creature with 6 tentacles and 2 sharp spines next to its mouth. Gosen named it Hexagon Monster. As for the herbivorous side, Gosen still prioritized the advantage of speed this time, and found a creature whose head looked like a blue sphere, and the rest of its body looked like a ruler. Notably, it also had a weird protrusion on its tail. Its name was naturally Ruler Monster. All right, the experiment is about to start. If everything goes smoothly, Gosen suppressed his excitement and started operating immediately. His idea was exactly the same as last time, which was to create a sense of crisis for both sides, so that they would start evolving crazily respectively. But what Gosen didn't expect was he encountered an accident very soon. Under his control, the Ruler Monster swam to a gathering place of the little red creatures and provoked them for a while. When the little red creatures surrounded it and it was just about to swim away, its tail suddenly flashed automatically. Right after that, the group of little red creatures seemed to be dead, completely motionless. Oh shit, before Gosen could react, other surrounding little red creatures started tearing at the bodies of these seemingly dead little red creatures. Gosen looked at the Ruler Monster, controlled it to approach a few more little red creatures. When it was about to be caught, its tail flashed again, and those little red creatures went motionless again as if dead. Now Gosen finally understood. The Ruler Monster's tail would automatically discharge electricity when in danger. When did this evolve? Being able to generate electricity makes no sense at all, right? He looked at the little green creatures again, carefully observing every species. After checking all around, he found something extremely amazing. These creatures seem to have evolved all kinds of awesome traits. Some hide in the algae, some use protective color to stay hidden and grow a bunch of flagella to make their speed incredibly fast. There are also creatures with extremely hard shells, fighting the little red creatures head-on, looking carefully at the little red colonies again. He even found creatures with fangs growing almost all over their bodies. Gosen looked at all this, suddenly felt that what he originally planned to do didn't seem that necessary anymore. He obviously didn't interfere at all, yet these creatures have evolved so fast, far beyond his imagination. Before they evolved from single-celled to multicellular organisms, they all had single, repeated traits, and were very simple-looking creatures. After becoming multicellular organisms, they welcomed a huge evolutionary explosion and continue to evolve towards more complex and more practical directions. Gosen thought for a while and decided not to do experiments to accelerate evolution anymore. Instead, he chose another path. To further expand their population size, these multicellular organisms, only reproducing and thriving in the saltwater lake, is far from enough. On the planet Gosen is in charge of, the total area of the ocean is tens of thousands of times larger than this saltwater lake for the birth of life. Relying only on the evolution of this small group is absolutely not enough. Only by constantly expanding the population can we better promote the evolution of these little lives. Gosen made up his mind and started carefully selecting the species of these little creatures and looking for new habitats. His planet has an extremely large area, and the ocean accounts for a considerable proportion of it. Based on the fact that These multicellular organisms usually live near the coast. This characteristic, Gosen first put a part of them on a coast not far away. He observed the waves here for a while. The height difference is not very obvious. There should be no disasters like tsunamis happening here. Gosen started the relocation. After the creatures in this area reproduced and spread, he moved a part of them to another place. This process lasted for quite a long time, when almost all habitable waters were inhabited by these little guys. Gosen even found some of them had even evolved structures similar to limbs, he thought. When it comes to evolution, he really doesn't need to do anything else anymore. What he should do is to provide them with a large, suitable living environment. As a planet, this is also what Gosen is best at. Looking at the global environment, he suddenly found something he had completely ignored. That is, the temperature of the entire planet seems to have dropped far more than before. The average temperature used to stay at 40 to 50 degrees, but now it is less than 20 degrees. The culprit for this, Gosen found immediately, is the ice sheets that were supposed to be located at the North and South poles. Now they are gradually expanding in opposite directions, even extending to positions near the center of the planet. Ice Age, that's what it's called, right? Gosen quickly remembered this term. What accompanies the Ice Age is the extinction of life populations that rely on temperature to survive. Those plants that finally made their way to land will never survive the unexpected cold snap. The same goes for the little creatures in the ocean. They must come up with countermeasures. Volcanoes erupt once more. Fires of hell burst out instantly across Gosen's lands and oceans and start to reheat him. This already ice-cold planet, the continuously erupting volcanoes immediately start to raise the temperature of the entire planet. The average global temperature that had been dropping also gradually rises again. Glaciers keep melting and retreating, breaking into countless icebergs. To prevent the icebergs from accidentally hitting the small lives on the shore, Gosen takes control of those icebergs and throws them straight back to the North and South poles. After some more time, as the temperature rises gradually, glaciers also slowly retreat to the areas near the poles. Until they are no longer that massive, only then does Gosen stop. He forcefully puts a number of erupting volcanoes into dormancy, leaving less than 1/5 of the volcanoes continuing to erupt. After this series of operations, some more time passes. Gosen stabilizes the entire planet's temperature at around 40 degrees Celsius again. The massive melting of glaciers also makes the global water level rise a lot. He lifts the land slightly by a few dozen meters. After expanding the land area a little, he finally stops. Gosen heaves a quiet sigh of relief in his mind. He did spend a lot of energy this time, but when he thinks that all these efforts are for those little lives to create a suitable and good living environment, he feels it is totally worth it. After all, if things go on like this, the little guys will start their great evolutionary journey and will eventually become countless intelligent beings. By that time, Gosen might really have someone to chat with to kill his boredom. With these thoughts in mind, he also speeds up the process of making primitive soil, cutting countless boulders from the rock masses and crushing them into powder. This work is far more boring than the previous ones, but it can also greatly reduce the difficulty for plants to move ashore, and even in the future, help them spread to places further inland, laying a solid foundation. The work of making soil continues. Gosen looks up at the green parent planet in the distance. He finds a very important thing, because he is a satellite. He has been orbiting around this planet all the time, and is tidally locked, which causes the sad fact that he has no 4 seasons. Fact, the current temperature on the sphere also proves this point. It is not like the Earth, which has 4 seasonal changes near the temperate zones. This will undoubtedly make the plant populations on his surface and animal populations have to accept the fate of having only summer in the future. Looking at the huge red star far behind him, Gosen is a little dissatisfied now. If he could orbit around this star, he would not have to worry about this kind of thing, nor would he have to worry about the arrival of the Ice Age, nor would he need to rely on volcanic eruptions to maintain the temperature all the time. Because of this parent planet, even the sunlight he receives is not that much. A dangerous and bold idea suddenly pops up in his mind. Why not get rid of this guy? Stop being a satellite and become a planet instead. Gosen actually knows very well. This thing, under normal circumstances, is absolutely impossible to achieve. After getting rid of the strong gravity of the parent planet, he still has to adjust his orbit around the star to ensure that he will not be pulled over by the star's gravity. Just thinking about all this makes him feel it is far too bold. But Gosen really can't stand it anymore. He wants to be a planet like the Earth, instead of orbiting this big green fool and spending countless days with only summer. This dangerous idea gradually grows in Gosen's mind. Even if he keeps rubbing rocks into sand, he can't stop this idea from expanding further. I quit. After orbiting the parent planet who knows how many more times, Gosen can't hold it back anymore. As a second-class citizen of the entire galaxy, this life is far too frustrating, especially that only one side of him can face the parent planet. Just thinking about it makes him feel awful. Gosen feels that only when he is on an equal footing with the parent planet can he let out this bad breath. If possible, why not give it a try first, even if there is only a 1 in a million chance? Gosen thinks so, and prepares to start fighting against the parent planet. What he needs to do is to use his almost omnipotent telekinesis to gradually get rid of the parent planet's gravity. Gosen noticed a fact a long time ago, that even if he is not willing to, on his orbit when revolving, there is always a magnet-like force, forcing him to follow an irregular circle, orbiting the parent planet. For such a long time, Gosen has always been resigned to this, and didn't take it seriously. After all, he didn't think it was a bad thing before. But now he is not happy about it. Let's fight back. Let's see. Gosen uses his telekinesis. He wants to make his orbit around this planet, gradually wider, and finally get rid of its control completely. The first step is always the hardest. Gosen already has this awareness. What he didn't expect was that it would be so difficult. His telekinesis only resisted a little before it was caught by an incredibly strong force. Gosen knows this is the parent planet's gravity that binds him. It is also because of this gravity that there are dozens of other satellite brothers around, orbiting with him. But if you don't resist, you will never know what the result will be. He starts a tug of war with the parent planet, but after a stalemate for a while, Gosen feels that pulling outward by force doesn't seem to work. That huge gravity won't let him get away that easily. What about speeding up the rotation? Gosen immediately starts the experiment. The result tells him that this is even more impossible. The opponent is still gravity. This method is also a wasted effort. Gosen is in an extremely distressed mood and has to continue orbiting the parent planet while racking his brain for a solution. After orbiting a few times, later, he suddenly finds a thing that has been ignored for a long time. The shape of the orbit is slightly like an elliptical orbit, making him sometimes closer to the parent planet and sometimes farther away from it. If when he runs to the farthest position, he plays a gravity tug-of-war with the parent planet, Gosen soon gets the opportunity. He is already approaching that position. Come on, Gosen musters all his strength. At the same time, that strong force starts to confront him again. However, after Gosen persisted for less than a while, this method was easily defeated by the power of the parent planet. He still can't challenge the powerful opponent. Damn it, what should I do? Gosen is a little anxious. As long as he tries to pull outward, even if he is at a position relatively far from the gravity, he still can't do it. To calm down his mood, he shifts his gaze and starts rubbing sand again. The boulders are being crushed and gradually fall apart. Gosen is also absent-minded when thinking of countermeasures. When he notices, he finds that he actually made 2 stone balls, one big and one small. Am I a little obsessed? Gosen mocks himself in his mind. Looking at the stone balls, he just wanted to crush them, when he suddenly thought, this can also intuitively simulate himself and the parent planet, soon under Gosen's control. The small stone ball like a marble. Gradually, he moved around the large stone ball the size of an exercise ball, and began making circular motions. Of course, Gosen also accurately simulated the shape of the orbit. Pulling outward definitely won't work. So what on earth should he do? Right! Gosen looked at the 2 stone balls and suddenly came up with a new idea. Gosen was a little excited. He had found a breakthrough. He could hardly wait to put this new idea into practice. Very soon, he once again reached the point farthest from the parent planet. This time, he didn't forcefully pull outward to turn. Instead, he followed the direction of the orbit's movement, tilted by a tiny angle, and used his telekinesis. Gosen found that he faced almost no strong resistance this time. He actually moved along the oblique front for a very long distance. It was such a simple thing, yet he had agonized over it for so long. He drew an arc like this, and then Gosen's orbit around the parent planet deviated a little. His joy didn't last long, before he realized again that he was bound by that strong gravitational pull once more. But to his relief, The orbit had already shifted outward by a large distance. This works! Bosun was eager to try. He also knew he had passed the first attempt. He had to stop for now, since there were still many things to consider later. For example, his siblings, the 50 or 60 satellites that orbit the parent planet together with him. If he accidentally collides with any of them during the movement, it would be an apocalyptic disaster. For the tiny lives on his surface, another thing to consider is the safe distance from that star. If he gets too close, he will be tidally locked just like he is now, and be scorched by the merciless heat waves. If he gets too far away, merciless ice and snow will completely cover him. These 2 points must be considered comprehensively. Either of them is deadly enough. But he thought for a while, and still felt that it would be more appropriate to move a little farther away from the star first. After all, on the side of the parent planet, the temperature from the sunlight is actually quite high. If he is a little farther away, things will actually be better. Bosun began to carefully check his exact position in the current planetary system. Before, he had paid too much attention to the ecosystem on his own sphere that he had never even taken a good look at. The general situation of this star system, the huge green gas giant in front of him, has incredibly spectacular planetary rings. Bosun carefully compared and estimated that this thing was hundreds of times his size. No wonder its gravity is ridiculously strong. Among the 50 or 60 satellites of the parent planet, Bosun is the largest one, but he can't measure his exact size himself. As for the other satellites, only 7 are spherical like him. Bosun would even rather call the rest asteroids if they weren't all orbiting the parent planet. He wouldn't even consider those pathetic tiny guys as his kind. Among all the satellites, Bosun's position is relatively in the middle. A little toward the outer side, most of the small satellites are located between the several planetary rings. There are also 2 smaller spherical satellites that are also located around this area. On the escape route, Bosun plans to take outward. There are 4 spherical satellites and 11 small satellites. This means, if he wants to escape from here unharmed, he has to consider the orbits of these 15 satellites comprehensively and absolutely avoid getting too close to them. At the same time, another thing he has to pay attention to is that he also has to figure out what distance he should orbit the star at. Looking at it this way, there are an overwhelming amount of complicated things to do for this escape journey. It will probably also take a huge amount of time, but time is the last thing Bosun lacks. During the escape process, the lives on his sphere will also evolve slowly. He has already done everything he needs to do, adding so many layers of protection to the cradle of life. The rest can be left to the test of time, so Bosun can focus all his energy on the matter of becoming an independent planet. While orbiting the parent planet, Bosun kept observing the orbits of the 3 satellites closest to him. He thought that if he wanted to pass through their operating orbits, he had to pay attention to the timing. According to his previous experiments, he can't move upward or downward. This way he can't utilize the space to dodge from positions above or below. These annoying little pests, he can only calculate their orbital paths and the minimum safe distance. While seeking an opportunity, the satellite closest to Bosun is a spherical satellite with a brown exterior. It is much smaller than Bosun, and its orbital speed is relatively slow. He observed carefully that when he completes 3 orbits, this thing has barely completed half an orbit. Besides, its operating orbit is basically in a different vertical plane from his. Dodging it is ridiculously easy. The one farther away is a small satellite, with a relatively fast operating speed, almost the same as his. Its orbital plane is also basically the same as his. Bosun thinks this one is quite dangerous. If he gets too close, there might really be trouble. The third one is also a small satellite. Its orbital plane is too different from his, so it basically poses no threat at all. It seems that to get through these 3 blockades, he only needs to carefully study how to dodge the second satellite. While maintaining his orbit, Bosun looked for an escape route. He first followed the method he used last time, away from the inner side of the parent planet's orbit, and kept moving outward. He observed the position of the brown satellite at the same time, and soon passed the first blockade. Next comes the top priority: how to dodge the small satellite whose speed and orbit are almost the same as his. He can't get too close, nor can he rush through just to go faster. After all, his moving speed is much slower than his orbital speed. What's more, he is also orbiting while moving. After observing the small satellite for a while, Bosun suddenly came up with a bold idea. What if he enters its orbit and positions himself exactly in a straight line with it? becoming the 2 points farthest apart on this elliptical orbit. This will work. Bosun made up his mind and started to act. He kept reducing the distance between his orbit and the small satellite's orbit. He calculated when this thing would be farthest from him, while also paying attention to the best timing for the point, where he is farthest from the parent planet's orbit. After another few hundred orbits, Bosun finally seized the opportunity. He acted immediately. His sphere rotated slowly and gradually moved to almost the exact same orbit as the small satellite and positioned himself directly opposite it. After finishing all this, Bosun finally let out a sigh of relief. He never expected that this second step would take so long to complete. He had no time to rest. Instead, he started calculating the way to get past the obstacles. Further ahead, the third one, the fourth one. After a very long time, Bosun found that there were only 2 last spherical planets in front of him finally. But at this time, he also suddenly felt that the light and heat emitted by the star seemed much hotter and more unbearable than before. The temperature on his sphere was also rising rapidly. The closer he got to the outermost orbit, the closer he was to the star. Bosun had long expected this. He had already made all the necessary preparations beforehand. If he hadn't thought of this, how could he have gotten past so many blockades? After going through countless hardships and spending an extremely long time, Bosun finally managed to move gradually to the outer orbital position of his parent planet's revolution. As long as he passed between the 2 spherical moons, there would be no more obstacles for him to worry about. He could finally decide when to completely break free from the parent planet's restraints and turn from a moon into a proper planet. Bosun had no idea how many years had passed since he left his original orbit to get to where he was now. A few thousand years, hundreds of thousands, or even longer. He pulled his attention back to the present. Everything that needed to be done was done. Right now, he didn't even have time to check on the fish of those little life forms. He was also dealing with a rather annoying problem at the moment. That was the light and heat coming from that distant star. It was making the temperature of his sphere rise slowly but steadily, but Bosun had already prepared for this a long time ago. Way earlier, he had completely stopped all volcanic eruptions on his surface. This had given the North and South poles a perfect chance for their glaciers to expand drastically. As he slowly approached the limit of the parent planet's gravitational control, these glaciers on his surface started melting again as his global temperature rose. This right here solved that fatal problem before it could even happen. Bosun had dodged a bullet, but he didn't have time to gloat about it. He had to cross this final barrier as soon as possible. After getting past these 2 large moons, he could continue shaking off the parent planet's gravitational pull. There were still 2 spherical moons in front of him. Bosun decided to get this over with quickly. Even though they were moving at an extremely fast speed and were basically on the same spatial plane as him, Bosun had already orbited a few times. The expansion of his orbit also made the time it took for him to reach the farthest point from the parent planet much longer than before. After another half orbit, he reached that point, but the closest gray planet just happened to pass by nearby, so he had to give up this opportunity. Bosun also kept an eye on the last white one. That guy's orbital frequency was even slower than his, and it was closer to the gray moon. If he wanted to make use of the time gap, he had to take it into account too. The opportunity came really soon. When Bosun reached the next farthest point, the gray moon just happened to have passed a little further ahead, and the farther white moon hadn't reached this area yet. He couldn't wait to start moving diagonally. After successfully reaching the gray moon's orbit, Bosun saw that the white moon still hadn't arrived, so he immediately slid onto its orbit right away. That went pretty smoothly. Just as Bosun was thinking that, a white shadow suddenly whizzed past. Holy shit! Bosun broke out in a cold sweat. He looked carefully and found that it was a comet roaring past with a huge tail trailing behind it. He had been focusing all his attention on avoiding the moons earlier, so he hadn't noticed anything else at all. If he had been a little slower when crossing earlier, this thing probably would have crashed right into him. Then all those little life forms on his surface would have faced total annihilation. Bosun was still shaken from the scare. Just as he was about to keep moving outward, he spotted another crescent-shaped dark gray small celestial body, which became a new obstacle in his path. Bosun stared at this object that he hadn't noticed before, because the light was too dim, slowly orbiting the parent planet, and couldn't help but smile bitterly in his mind. Why does this thing look like half a pickled garlic? Pair it with that big white dumpling moon that's been following me, and they actually make a pretty good match. But if I capture it as my new moon, would that have a huge impact on my planet? Bosun remembered when he fought with the parent planet for the big white dumpling moon last time and almost got all the little life forms killed. He immediately dismissed the urge to capture the pickled garlic look-alike. He quickly dodged the slow-moving guy and moved further out into space. But strangely enough, Bosun kept feeling that during this constant moving process, that huge force pulling on him seemed to be getting smaller and smaller, more and more faint. He realized that he might have already reached the limit of the parent planet's gravitational control area. It was hard to say for sure. Bosun tried to pull himself outward directly to move. Instead of waiting to reach the farthest point, hell yeah. Bosun could feel that force didn't even seem to be stronger than his own psychic power. He could even move further out easily. While he kept moving outward, he also kept looking around, checking for any dangerous objects. If he ran into another comet or some dark hidden moon, he could react in time. Luckily, there were no such things nearby. The whole plan was already halfway to success. Bosun could finally turn his attention to that red star. What he needed to do now was find an orbit to revolve around this star, so he could become a real planet. At the same time, as he kept moving outward, he could also feel the parent planet's gravitational pull on him, getting weaker and weaker, but the temperature of his planet was also rising constantly at the same time. When he orbited to the side facing away from the star, the temperature would drop sharply again. Bosun felt he couldn't afford to delay any longer. He had to prepare for the next step immediately. The preliminary plan he had made earlier was to establish his orbit in the area right behind the parent planet. The temperature there would probably be more suitable, with suitable temperature plus a proper orbital inclination. Bosun could soon have 4 seasons on his planet. Bosun got excited. He carefully observed the star area behind the parent planet. That was the perfect paradise for life. But to Bosun's surprise, there was a small orange planet there, constantly orbiting and rotating around the star. He was completely dumbfounded for a second. What the actual fuck? What have I been working so hard for all this time? Just to coexist with this stuck-up little prick. This is such total bullshit. Bosun really wanted to charge right over and knock that guy flying. But if he did that, he would also break into pieces. Not to mention all the little life forms on him would die too. Before he could think about entering orbit, Bosun soon spotted another black planet. That guy's rotation speed was insanely fast. At the same time, Bosun noticed there was a layer of smoke-like substance on this thing's surface, trailing behind it, like rock powder coming off its body. He immediately understood the star's enormous gravitational pull was yanking on this unlucky planet, constantly stripping the rock off its surface, probably in the far distant future. This guy will completely turn into dust. Bosun looked at the now very far away, but also extremely spectacular planetary ring. That was probably the final fate of this black planet. The temperature of his planet had already pushed the glaciers, almost all the way back to the North and South Poles. If he didn't make a decision soon, he would be totally screwed later. Bosun glanced at that orange little prick again and sighed in his mind. There was no way to push it away anyway, so he had to be neighbors with this guy. Bosun moved outward from the side, where the parent planet's gravity was getting thinner and thinner. After some more time passed, he could no longer feel that weird force at all. He had broken free from the green gas giant's restraints. He wasn't that far away from that orange planet either. Ha! Hell yeah, I did it. The moment Bosun completed this epic feat, he was just about to praise himself a little when he suddenly felt a force countless times stronger than the parent planet's yank him firmly in place. The crimson star was shining with unbearably scorching light. Under its immensely powerful gravitational pull, even a huge guy like the green gas giant was nothing more than a subject under its rule. Just as Bosun broke free from his parent planet's gravity, he was also successfully captured by the star's gravitational pull. Damn bro, your power is totally insane. Bosun couldn't even put up the slightest bit of resistance. He had no choice but to start orbiting the star against his will. Even though he had officially become a planet, Bosun wasn't happy about it at all right now. Back when he was still in the embrace of his home planet, he could at least move little by little using clever rules. But now, pitting his psychic power against the star's gravity is like an ant trying to topple a giant tree. He could only obediently play the little brother. Fine, boss. Congratulations. You've got someone who used to be your little brother's little brother, now upgraded to your direct little brother. That's me. You can be proud of that. Bosun thought to himself, a bitter feeling still lingering in his heart. Orbiting around the star, he felt its light and heat. Gosen was experiencing the treatment of being a lucky planet for the first time. He wasn't tidally locked. As he looked at his former home planet in the distance, Gosen felt like he was in a dream. Not long ago, he was just a second-class citizen, but now he was on equal footing with his former boss. It was absolutely surreal. But this was also the result of his constant hard work. Any other satellite in his position would never have been able to pull this off. Gosen circled the star again and again. He noticed that this new orbit seemed just like the previous one, oval in shape. What's more, he himself could adjust from time to time the rotation frequency and speed of his sphere. He could even adjust the angle at which the star's light hit his surface. Gosen suddenly remembered what the obliquity of the ecliptic for Earth was. He tried hard to recall the knowledge. From his high school geography textbooks, he wanted to turn himself into a high-fidelity copy of Earth. Earth's environment was as if it had been precisely calculated. The obliquity of the ecliptic, its own rotation frequency, orbital speed, and so on. Even the tiniest deviation would immediately plunge all living beings on it into total catastrophe. Could Earth be conscious too? Gosen guessed boldly. At the same time, he kept adjusting his rotation speed and orbital speed. He vaguely saw similar theories online before, saying that Earth was a giant organism and humans were just bacteria living on its surface. This idea was terrifying when you thought about it deeply. He also adjusted his own obliquity of the ecliptic to 23 degrees 26 minutes. Before this, Gosen would have scoffed at this idea for sure, but now as a conscious planet himself, he completely believed this hypothesis. Hadn't he controlled volcanoes before? Created an atmosphere and oceans. He even intervened in the evolution speed of single-celled life. The more Gosen thought about it, the more scared he got. He successfully adjusted his rotation speed to around 24 hours. Gosen kept part of his attention on calculating the rotation time, precise down to the second. To avoid errors, he even ran the calculations hundreds of times. At the same time, he also adjusted his orbital speed to around 360 days per cycle, with a margin of no more than 5 days. If he was going to make a high-fidelity copy, he was going to do it perfectly. Everything was for the little living beings on his surface. After Gosen finished making final adjustments to his rotation, tilt angle and frequency, he finally let out a sigh of relief. The general environment was finally ready, from a tidally locked satellite to a planet orbiting a star, and then making all kinds of adjustments modeled after Earth. For the rest of the time, he could focus all his attention on the little beings in the oceans on his surface. Come to think of it, how long had it been since he last checked on them? Gosen couldn't even remember. He had been busy doing all kinds of things to become a planet, so he had no time for anything else. All right, let's check on my little guys. How far have they evolved by now? Gosen took one last look at the big white dumpling that was still silently orbiting him, then turned his full attention to the surface of his sphere.